Welcome to the Collaborative Approaches to K-5 Literacy webinar. We're going to talk about building effective tutor, teacher, and family partnerships. My name's Jim McVetti. I'm the moderator today. The story isn't about me. The story you're going to hear is from Brandy and Mindy, my co-panelists on this session. Now, just as we dive in, I want to give a special shout out to OnYourMark Education. They're the underwriters of this and several forthcoming webinars that we'll have on edWeb. They're kind of a special organization. They're a project of Cambiar, and as a nonprofit, they exist to close the literacy gap for students because their focus is on foundational literacy skills. They're really here for all students every day. So what Mindy and her team have done has really created a set of practices in partnering with schools to strengthen their existing literacy programs, particularly around Tier 2 and Tier 3 students. So the idea is providing high-impact virtual literacy tutoring to students during the school day. So they're really integrating, not trying to be disruptive to the process, and building capacity. So what's fascinating, I've had a sneak preview of some of the content that we're going to cover today. There are lessons in here about implementing your own program, be it with OnYourMark or others, but also there's life lessons about leadership, about communication, about building trust and celebrating wins. And that's going to be a big deal for us today. So we invite you to come along, and we want to again say thanks to the folks at OnYourMark. So let me say thanks now to Brandy. I've been talking a lot. Brandy, I'd love for you to introduce yourself. The folks on this listening in and watching either here live or listening in on demand later, they're going to be excited to get to know you. Brandy, say hi and tell us about yourself.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this space. I'm incredibly excited to talk about the partnership that's happening with OnYourMark. To give you a bit of context around how I got into this work, I was actually a college student pursuing what I thought would be marine biology or physical therapy, and began to work in a school district in an autism unit. And so from there, my career has catapulted, so to speak, through various work in juvenile justice, state school for the visually impaired, some of the most affluent districts, and some of the most resource-stricken areas as well. So I have done it all, seen it all in education. And so the work that I do currently is to bring all of those experiences into this space so that students have equitable opportunities to close skill gaps, and we continue to build solid foundations around literacy in our communities.
It's such amazing work and important work focused on equitable access and delivering outcomes for all students. So just on behalf of kids everywhere and the adults who care about them, thanks for being in service. And Mindy, you're sitting next to someone who's pretty special, but you're not too shabby in your own right. You've developed this organization after a career in education. It's also, this topic's kind of personal for you. Give us a little bit of your background, if you don't mind.
Yeah, indeed. So I'm a teacher. That's how I started in this work, and it's how I consider myself first and foremost today. So I started as a teacher in a middle school, where I learned very quickly that as a social studies teacher, I was actually a reading teacher. And because a lot of the students that I had the privilege to serve came to middle school, and then when I was a high school principal, came into these upper grades with a lot of gaps, and gaps that a lot of times teachers of older students just don't know how to fill. And so that was my first experience with how important reading intervention is. And from there, I spent quite a bit of time in teacher preparation and really thinking about how we can grow early career teachers to meet the needs of all kids before leaning into this space at OnYourMark, where I had this opportunity to think about intervention for struggling readers in a really different way. And so OnYourMark came out of right after the pandemic, where we know kids have been struggling in reading historically for a long, long time. But we got this really unique opportunity to start thinking about virtual learning in a different way, and how we can use the best of virtual learning to really amplify and support, amplify the work of teachers on the ground, and really support and build their capacities to make sure that schools are able to meet the needs of all struggling readers. And this all happened for me at the same time that my youngest child was diagnosed with dyslexia. And this wasn't until he was 13 years old. And it was because I knew that something wasn't quite right, and that he hadn't been getting explicit instruction, and that he needed something different. And that seeing my own child go through that really has instilled in me this drive to ensure that we are able to work with as many students as possible in wonderful schools like Brandy serves in, to be able to help support their struggling readers.
You said 13?
13.
13. Wow. I mean, that's a big deal for a kiddo to have to struggle. So it makes sense why you're so passionate about trying to expand opportunities for students, all over the country. So thanks to both of you for sharing with your background. And if you've been listening in, you can see why we're so excited to get to know these folks. If you're listening in via a future podcast, you'll see a little bit about me. Doesn't matter. I'm here about the topic. That's collaborative approaches to K-5 literacy. So what I find interesting is that we're not really talking about a specific solution set here today. We're talking about an approach, a strategy, a set of mindsets, ways of operating that help build effective programs. And in the agenda today, we're going to talk about three big topics, all that leading towards a collaborative approach. And the first is defining roles and clarifying expectations for stakeholders. The second we're going to cover is building trust with intentional, transparent, and responsive communication. And then finally, we're going to look at how you commit to shared ownership and continuous improvement. Along the way, we're going to do a little bit of celebration of success. So I'm so pleased that we're not talking about a feature set. We're really talking about a mindset and how we make this work. So, all right. Keep doing what you're doing. Hi, Cynthia from North Carolina. You're a music teacher in K-5. Interesting. I'd love to hear what you have to say. And everyone else, whether you're from Scranton or Second Cities, please let us know. Let's talk about having clear roles and expectations. Brandy, when you bring in a partner and you start thinking about all those things, it really just isn't about you and a partner. It's about all the stakeholders. So how do you start defining roles when you think about a big shift in the way you do business as an educator?
I particularly lean into the component of when we establish strong relationships, we are all interconnected in a way that supports each other's needs and we can grow through anything. And so that's incredibly significant in the work that happens with Yes Prep and our partners. We are incredibly passionate about the relationships we build in this space. And we also want to highlight expectations. And so within those expectations, how do we interact with each other? Are there questions about how that occurs? And how do we support each other in ways that are most meaningful to what we expect the relationship to produce?
Mindy, build on that a little bit because the relationships thing is key. And when we talk about roles, especially in a collaborative approach to K-5 literacy, you're talking about staff, particularly teachers. You're talking about the tutors, the folks that help build capacity, and then the caregivers at home. So easy for me to label, but how do you talk about the definition of roles in there? What some of those conversations get pretty tricky, I would think.
Yeah, they do. But to Brandy's point, anything can be tackled if there's strong relationships in place, right? And so I think when I think back to when On Your Mark's relationship with Yes Prep began, it was intentional building towards a partnership together. I remember first meeting Brandy when she and some of her team came and visited another one of our implementations on the ground. And that was when we first had the opportunity to start really feeling each other out, to better understand what our intentions were and what the expectations would be of the programming, and having that core relationship building set in place first, I think was fundamental to making sure that we were then able to define everybody's roles in the process. And I think we got really lucky at On Your Mark that Brandy has been our main point of contact at Yes Prep.
And Brandy, you were the main point of contact, but you had teachers to your left and your right. Is that what I'm hearing?
Absolutely. So the group that joined me in that space, I wanted feedback from the content team as well as boots on the ground folks, so to speak. And so we had an interventionist to accompany us as well. And so all of us came to that space recognizing the greater uh, passion that we were fulfilling in terms of potentially utilizing this vendor. However, everyone had a very clear set of look fors in relation to their particular work streams. And so that is the space where we wanted to get that feedback and see the same things in the same spaces so that we could have conversations around our individual expertise and how it overall would contribute to our stakeholders.
So the you had a unique set of look fors, and I imagine that your look fors were slightly different than, say, a grade three teacher's look fors. Is that a fair assumption?
Absolutely. So, in terms of the interventionist perspective, thinking how this supports the classroom teacher, how this supports the work of tier 2 and tier 3 students, curriculum directors and specialists looking from the lens of does this align with our current strategies, how we expect students to access literacy, their literacy acquisition, rather. And then in terms of how do I make all of these working parts come together for the benefit of our students and families for greater outcomes. So it was very um, enlightening what we saw and what we experienced, and also just to be in the same space with about 3 to 4 different people and everyone take away something different that was experienced based on their background knowledge.
I have the privilege of being able to intersect with teachers and building leaders, interventionists on a pretty regular basis. And there's something I often hear when I talk to classroom teachers is they say, "Oh, I'm just a teacher." And so I know we have a couple hundred folks here listening today, and if you're a classroom teacher, please hear me on this. You are not just a teacher; you are a critical stakeholder in these kinds of conversations, and you're perhaps the most important influencer in decisions about partnerships and you're the most impactful influencer on the success of those partnerships. So I hope I got that right, Brandy, because I feel that pretty deeply, and I hope others hear the work that you're doing to bring those folks in because that is so critically important.
Yes, I am very aligned to that statement.
All right, right on. Well, I want to talk a little bit about, having kind of help define roles. How do you set clear expectations? And we've got a list here of things that you can do. And I mentioned in the opener that these are not just life lessons that can be applied towards fostering a collaborative environment around K-5 literacy tutoring, but they're really kind of how you get stuff done organizationally. So we're talking about communication, and asking the right questions. We're talking about using data and monitoring progress. Of course, collaboration is the spirit in which we all want to operate towards a set of shared goals and outcomes. So, with that as the backdrop, I want to ask you a specific question that carries from the last slide where we talked about staff, tutors, and caregivers. How do you set expectations for parents and households in the community? Because you're introducing this kind of work, it's a new flow. So I'd love for you to speak to that community specifically, because a lot of people interface with parents, bus drivers. I know this because I'm a backup bus driver. Teachers, admins, school secretaries, and administrative assistants. How do you think about the caregivers, the adults in the homes?
Absolutely. So, again, our organization is very relational based, and we have a strong upfront commitment to families that when they become a part of our district, we are working to hear them and do those things that are most impactful for their students. And so, in response to that, we are also aware that we have to have those constant touch points with families to hear from them. So, we invite them into schools. We have staff who are out in the bus line, who are out in the car rider line, who live in the communities, who attend community events, because we want to hear from folks in their authentic spaces so that they feel comfortable sharing their feedback, whether it's a positive experience or a challenge they've encountered. we are very intentional about taking that feedback and having conversations about what do we do to either continue what is working very well for our families from their perspective, in addition to the student data, or what continues to surface as a challenge, and how do we hear each other out and move forward with the intended goal. So it's all about those communication strategies, as well as where are you having those touch points so that families are more comfortable to be able to feel like they are a true stakeholder in their children's educational experience.
Yeah. So I'd love for teachers in the community here on the chat to weigh in on this. I mean, how many times have you had a curriculum just kind of land with a thud on your desk and say, okay, team, here's what we're using? And you've not only got to navigate that whole process, you've then got to communicate to your parents. Um, how do you communicate this new curriculum? I've heard both as a parent and in working in schools, teachers say, "Well, I don't know. They just threw it at us like 3 days before school started, so we're going to do our best." So, Mindy, if you're up for it, in the context of tutoring, which is not the same as curriculum, how do you coach your schools on that communication piece back into the home? How do you let schools give them the power to communicate effectively to households that, hey, this is happening and here's why?
Thanks so much for the question, Jim. And sorry, y'all, 'tis the season for colds and coughs and all the fun. Um, I just think what Brandy said around the way that they cultivate relationships with their families is so important, and that as an external tutoring provider, we need to lean on them and learn from them around what is the best way for us to be able to engage with their families and caregivers to make sure that we are fitting within those really strong relationships that have already been built and exist, right? And I think for us that we have a lot of learning to do from them in that space, and that's what I get to continually do with Brandy when she gives us feedback around what is it that they would like to be able to share with their parents. What is it that parents are asking for? What questions do they have about what their students are doing in tutoring? And so from that, we've created some initial systems that we're always growing and evolving around that type of communication. So it starts with a letter home, very simply to parents to say, your child has been selected to participate in tutoring, and here's what you can expect from that, and here's the reason why they were chosen to receive these additional supports. I think that often in education, our parents don't feel like, I feel like this as a parent, as a former school leader, and then also now as a tutoring provider, that our parents often feel uninformed, and the assumption sometimes on the school part is like, it's a lot of work to be able to get them engaged, but it's the most important work that we can be doing because they are the experts in their children. And so the more we are able to communicate with them, the better we are going to be able to provide the kind of supports for their children that they need.
Yeah, I
And so
think.
then, oh, sorry, go ahead,
Oh,
Jim.
no, please go ahead. Keep going.
I was just going to say part of what our collaboration with Brandy and team has brought about is that we also provide then a report that can be sent home to families through their teachers to ensure that they are aware of exactly what's happening in tutoring, the progress that the student is making, as well as some like handy tips on what they can be doing to support their child's reading development based on the skills that they're working on in their tutoring sessions as well.
So it's really good to unpack the different moves you can make to facilitate uh, trust building communication. And I'm looking at these questions, which I just narrated, but I'll kind of revisit communication, a key one about how to establish clear expectations. But Brandy, we're also looking at things like data and progress monitoring. And it seems to me that you and your teacher should be asking, well, how is this going to be tracked? And will it be shared? What data is going to be collected and who's going to use that? Um, Talk a little bit about like the data conversation here.
Absolutely. So we are a data rich system. And as a system, we have phases that we look at in terms of what type of data do we really want to highlight in that time period, as to recognize the types of skills students should have acquired. And so, in terms of the tutorial component, this aligns perfectly with student data for interventions. We want to ensure that we see students getting consistent access to those foundational skills. And in conjunction with that, we have conversations with school leaders as well as teachers as to when this data will be available, what are the expectations in how we use this data, and make decisions about student support moving forward. So everyone is clear the timelines that data will be available, the types of discussions that will happen in response to data, and then those very targeted actions as a result of reviewing the data and having those extended conversations.
I'm looking at these questions here, like how will student progress be tracked, and even on the collaboration and the goals and outcomes piece. How will teachers and tutors work together to plan and implement an intervention? How will families be involved, which is talked about, and I think that's so critically important. And then looking at goals and outcomes, what are the specific goals for each student? How will success be measured? Not just an end game, but along the way, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. And I'm just going to turn back to the teachers, the literacy coordinators, the interventionists that are listening here today, and via on demand or podcast. These are the questions you should be asking as well. These are the questions you should ask the folks like Brandy. Okay, Brandy, I'm glad we're here in the room. Here's my look fors, but I got to tell you, how are we going to be measured? What's the communication path going to be like? And I think that all centers on establishing clear expectations, which is so important. I'm glad we got to visit this for a while. And we're going to come back to issues around communication and trust building. But there's the other thing too, which is scope creep. Like the idea of clarifying boundaries and responsibilities is so important. So, Mindy, when you're asked the question about like, gosh, if we bring you in, what does that mean? What do you tell them when it comes to boundaries and responsibilities?
I think this first point around tutoring being a supplement is the thing that's most important to understand first and foremost. And the way that we really talk with our partners about it is that we are here to help build capacity for your teachers. Teaching is a hard job. Our teachers are expected to meet the vast needs of all of the students in their classrooms, and they are there because they care about each one of those students and their individual needs. And so, being really clear up front that tutoring is a resource to be able to help build that teacher's capacity to meet those individual student needs. That we can basically all of a sudden in a snap, when students log on to their tutoring sessions, we can increase the number of adults in that room, in some cases by 10, in some cases by 20. And that is all about capacity building supports. It is not in any way, shape, or form taking over the role of that classroom teacher who is driving that instruction and is making sure that they have the plan, the full scope of what's happening for all of the readers in their classrooms.
So, Brandy, in some of your classrooms, then, I'm just picturing, and I'm kind of a layperson here, so I don't, I haven't been at the front of the classroom in many decades, but I'm trying to picture this idea of moving kids into a tutoring center. Is it kind of like they're at their own station, and they're each in a one-on-one or one-on-two kind of setting with a tutor all in the classroom?
So, in our case, we were actually able to identify specific spaces for students to move to. Uh, we have also seen this model in place where it's happening within the classroom, where the teacher is having a small group occur at the same time that students are logged in and being supported by a tutor from On Your Mark. So, technically, there are three adults in the room, several virtually from the On Your Mark side, and then of course possibly an assistant as well as the teacher. Uh, what we find is that students are just overwhelmingly excited about the number of adults that are giving them attention during that time. And so it makes them feel incredibly special that so many adults are excited to help them learn to read. Uh, in these spaces, again, we prioritize at Yes Prep students having spaces where they can concentrate on what's happening in front of them, that the equipment is prepped and ready to go, and that they know during that time what's expected of them and how they engage with the teacher to support their own learning, even at a very young age.
Man, so color me skeptical. I mean, I believe it works because I've seen the data in other settings, and you two are widely recognized experts in the field. But teachers here, if you have a little kind of skeptical bent on this, feel free to ask questions. I'm sure they'd love to field those and talk it through. Because Brandy, it's kind of amazing you're making it work, and the 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 hidden secret in there, the kind of the secret power there is you're really clear and intentional with those moves. So like we found spaces, we made sure the tech works. Of course, the tutors are qualified, certified, validated, verified. So all of that matters, and I'm kind of getting to this idea of like if you can find one trusted adult for each kid, that kid's got a much better chance for success. The research proves that out. Now what you're introducing is two, three, four, many more adults, where a kid can find a trusted space and person to connect with. That's pretty powerful. So it's so great to hear about. With the setup, like the defined roles, the clarified expectations, the idea that hey, this is the plan. I want to come back to this idea of building trust, particularly around communication. We've unpacked it a little bit just a few minutes ago, but I believe you have some feelings here about what are the non-negotiables when it comes to trust and communication. And again, this is where I'm kind of fascinated that we're talking about a collaborative approach to K-5 literacy in the context of tutoring, and yet these apply to so many instances. So Mindy, if you're up for it, I'm going to talk to you. Like, what are your non-negotiables going in when you identify schools that you have the privilege of working with?
Yeah, I mean, and it really is a matching process, right? It's having those conversations up front to make sure that the fit is right, and that the values are aligned between the schools and between, in this case, On Your Mark, but any external partner that you might be bringing in to work with students, right? And for us, one of the things that's non-negotiable from the start is that we are going to have a consistent feedback loop. And that means making sure that we protect time, and it starts out weekly. It was probably a lot at first, right, Brandy? And then slowly over time, we back off to like once every other week. And in that time, when we set aside the time for collaboration and for continuous improvement, we have to make sure that we are able to have open and honest dialogue for the improvement of the programming for students, because that is what is at the heart of the work. And that in order to do that, the things that you have up on the screen, Jim, are essential. We have to listen to each other. We have to do so actively to better understand exactly what's going on from each other's experience. We often tell our tutors when they're like, this thing happened in the classroom while I was tutoring, because they have some, line of sight into things going on around a student. We have to remind them, you don't know the context. You are not familiar with the whole situation that's going on here. And so we are just going to say what we see. We are not going to jump to any conclusions about what is happening, in a building, or why a student got so excited that day. They might not know that they had an assembly right before and it was harder for them to focus in their session. So making sure that we actively are ready to listen to each other is so, so important. And that relationship sets the stage for when things might arise or challenges might happen, that we can really have open dialogue to work through that conflict. And we need to make sure that we're noticing all the good things that are going on. And those things should not be left unsaid. They need to be made public. We need to go ahead and share out with each other when we see amazing things happening from students, when we see great things happening from tutors, and that when we see really good work happening, to make sure that kids are able to fully engage in their sessions. All of those things need to be celebrated accordingly.
Yeah, I totally agree. I just posted a note that when I first read these a little while ago, I thought of them as amazing for the classroom, the boardroom, and my dining room table next week. For sure, I'm going to have to apply these principles. Brandy, you've been living these non-negotiables for a while, and you've been implementing some keys to building trust, including things like intentionality, transparency, and being responsive and proactive. Um, I'd love for you to talk about a scenario in your school where you've had to go forth and build some trust. Maybe it's a skeptical teacher, a concerned parent, or an administration that says, "You want to do what?" I'd love to hear how you started to build that trust.
Absolutely. So I will use a situation that occurred with some family buy-in. And so there were some students who were identified to receive this support who had tardy issues. And so all of us in the education world, we recognize that it's still a significant concern in terms of student having access to a full day of instruction. So in this case, we were very strategic about identifying staff that had really great relationships with families, were an embedded part of the school community, and just had a very great awareness in how to be sensitive to family needs, but also continue uh, to push families to help resolve that issue of their student not being there on time. So our campus leaders, they essentially locked arms and said, this is our strategy. These are the people who are going to contact parents, whether they want the parent to come to the school, whether the parent would like to just pull over in the car line, whether they can meet up at the neighborhood playground. And they were very successful in having those conversations to help build parent knowledge, one, in the importance and the impact of getting their student to school, but also how this benefits um, what the parent expectation is of Yes Prep in educating their students. And so I don't think we would have been as successful if we would have just simply said, let's choose any random staff member to have that conversation. We had to be incredibly intentional about the approach for those families in order to make them feel more comfortable and come on board with a plan to get their student to school to have access to this really great resource.
You're really highlighting the importance of meeting folks where they're at. So including the pull aside and the car line, I think is a good metaphor for, hey, we'll step aside and spend time with you. That's what good leaders do, and I appreciate that. Um, Mindy, when you're leading the implementation of an effort, how do you walk towards issues? Like, for example, in this keys to building trust slide, we've got things like strategic stakeholder selection, which Brandy just talked about. Like, we've got to find the right people, and we've got to make sure there's a reliable cadence to that communication and meeting them where they're at. But in your case, sometimes you have to walk towards things that don't go so well. So, how do you do that, Mindy? What's your mindset going into those conversations?
I mean, I think it always starts with coming from a place where we are seeking to understand and asking questions rather than moving into difficult conversations with assumptions, predefined assumptions about exactly what's going on. And I think, especially as a virtual tutoring provider, knowing that we aren't on the ground with schools and we don't have a line of sight into exactly what the challenges are that are happening on their side. I think, you know, Brand, happens at our other sites, and I want to like shout Yes Prep out. They have the highest attendance rate of any of our schools across the country, and we still, to Brandy's point, we still have conversations about attendance because tutoring doesn't work if students aren't getting tutored. And so that's like one area where we've had ongoing conversation where we can say, hey, what we've seen with this grade level, and I think later on we actually have a slide that shows some of the data that we're sharing with this grade level. We see that attendance is a little bit lower than at this grade level. What might be happening that is creating that? Is it something that our tutors can do to make sure that kids are more excited about coming to sessions? Can we help support them to be more engaged? Is there something that's happening in a classroom where those students are coming from, where they maybe the teacher is forgetting or is running a little bit behind, and so a student isn't able to start their tutoring session on time? So it really is coming into those situations with an open mind and asking questions rather than making assumptions about what is happening in places, especially that we can't see.
Yeah, I think anticipate when you build that layer of trust, that's a really good point at the end there. Like this idea of if you get that right, you don't have to be in the room all the time. Like if you get that trust piece right, if you are intentional and transparent and responsive, then when stuff happens, the tutor and teacher can figure it out. The teacher and the parent can sort it out because they have that layer of trust. I think that's an important takeaway for all of us. And when you talk about keys to building trust, Brandy, I think you've shared your lived experience about giving diverse options across multiple communication channels. So, Mindy, you referenced a letter. Brandy, you referenced, hey, we'll pull you aside in the car line and we'll spend time there. And I think always being clear and perhaps jargon free is something else that's mentioned on this keys to building trust slide. I mean, we can get pretty technical, pretty wonky in our language. And especially when you're talking about the littles, the wee ones, K-5, we don't need to be all technical about it. We just want to get stuff done. So with that said, when we get towards continuous improvement, it's Mindy, you mentioned just a few minutes ago this idea of regular feedback loops in this process. Talk about what you mean by that, and then Brandy, I'm going to ask you, how have you seen that work in operation?
Yeah, I mean, once again, it's setting up an intentional cadence around when we're going to be meeting, and that in and of itself is something that helps create just this habit of ongoing communication. But we also know that as things come up, we sometimes can't wait 2 weeks to be able to have a conversation with somebody around what's happening. And so, being clear about who the points of contact are, both at the school site, at the district site, in Brandy's case, and then also with the provider at On Your Mark. And I know that Brandy knows exactly who she can reach out to, multiple people she can reach out to at On Your Mark if things aren't going the way that they're intended, or if something comes up that we need to tackle right away together. And so being really clear about, I mean, for goodness sake, Brandy, you can reach out to me anytime, and I hope you know that. And being really clear about who those people are up front is a huge win, and that we are very approachable. Like, this is a space where we're all in it again to make sure that children are getting the reading instruction and developing those reading skills that they deserve. That sets up the floor for having open dialogue around things when they come up.
So, how do you affect a two-way communication feedback loop? I'm trying to think about this a little bit. So, I'm a teacher. I've got 20 kiddos wiggling about the classroom. Some of them move into an intervention space. They do their thing. Actually, Brandy, I'll point this to you. Like, how does that communication between uh, teacher, tutor, you as a leader, like, what's the flow there? Are you looking at reports? I guess this ties to the data-driven improvement piece, but like, what are you looking at, Brandy, to know that things are happening the way you hope they would happen?
A little bit of backwards planning happens there, Jim, in
Oh, nice.
terms of how do we at the district level support campuses in terms of ensuring they understand how to read their data, any questions they may have for On Your Mark in regards to the data, being incredibly aware of their next steps and actions, and then being able to convey that information in a space with teachers that feels aligned to the work that teachers are already doing and any additional steps. So we think about our PLCs, we think about one-on-one meetings, we think about grade level meetings, uh, any space that is already stamped in the master schedule where we can have those ongoing conversations about that data in a way that not only, of course, benefits our students, but so that teachers are very aware of how this partnership continues to support the overall goal that they have for the students in their space.
That's interesting. I didn't think about PLCs and their role in this work. Can you just stretch that out a little bit? That's an interesting comment. I guess I had been a little bit narrow in my thinking, but how did you involve the PLC uh, process in this work?
So, literacy, we know, is incredibly wide and vast. And anywhere there is written material, we want to ensure students have access to it, which means those other components of the curriculum. So, we want our math teachers, we want other stakeholders such as TAs to be aware of where student reading skills are and how do they continue to provide equitable access to grade level materials while we continue to work on those foundational skills. So when we have the conversations in relation to the data that's presented, it gives all of those individuals in that space an idea of how students are growing and what types of supports they continue to need within that particular component of the curriculum until we close that skill gap. So everyone is aligned to the types of resources that students get access to and are being able to use consistently, again, to ensure we're all working together for that same grade level achievement.
Uh, Thanks for that setup because you're you're touching on a lot of key points, including this idea of being responsive to change. So I asked you about PLCs, but um, you have such a good vision for this. It isn't really about folks sitting around a table uh, and necessarily just strictly sharing. They're really working the problem, using data to say, this is where this kiddo's at, this is what I'm doing, and this is what we can be doing. So this idea of being responsive to change and taking a problem-solving approach, I bet a lot of that magic happens in those PLC environments. So, Mindy, I'm going to come back to you because you said a comment when you were introducing yourself that you were a social studies teacher, but you
That's
ended
right.
up teaching reading quite a bit. I got to believe you're listening to Brandy talk about math teachers and STEM teachers and social studies and all getting together saying, you know what? Fundamentally, we're all reading teachers.
Mhm. Yes. And I think
Yes.
yes, underline that, underscore, exclamation point. We are all reading teachers, and I think if we do the work collectively to arm ourselves with information around how children develop their reading abilities, we can do a much better job of meeting students where they are to ensure that they are able to access grade level work. Brandy did such a nice way of saying that in talking about the PLC work. We want for all of our students to be tackling on grade level concepts in science, but we know that science is a heavy, heavy reading subject. So if I'm a science teacher and I am really struggling to ensure that a student is reading the text that is in front of them, how can I go back to what reading skills they're working on? How can I look back at the conversations that are having in PLCs to better understand how I can get them access into that text? Because it's not just going to come by telling students, okay, you can do it, you can do great hard grade level text. No, they need supports to get there, and making sure that we are sharing that data together around what students are working on arms teachers across subject areas to make sure that they can also help to support that skill development in their classrooms.
Brandy, I see you nodding, so it seems like you have some lived experience with these themes. Can you talk about them?
Absolutely. So, we are a feedback rich, heavy organization, and we empower teachers to ask the questions to really push us on our thinking as an organization and how it impacts what's occurring within their space. And so, as a result of that, we actually have an initiative that's happening district wide. Where we want to have an accelerated approach to how we're closing student gaps, because closing a gap by 1 year is simply not enough. We need to accelerate it if we want students to be on grade level when they leave elementary. So again, going back to how we use the data from the tutorials in that space helps us to be very cognizant of, do students need some form of accommodations in order to access the curriculum when they are required to um, engage with grade level material. And we want teachers to think deeply about where student reading levels are as they plan, as well as coaching other leaders. How do you support this content area if students are not reading on grade level? How do you help the teacher think with a path forward in terms of how they consistently plan to support the student? And what does the data tell you? It's all in the data.
It's all
Mhm.
it's all in the data. One of my data points is the number of hands clapping that float across my screen. The emojis are powerful when you both are speaking. So, by the way,
I
I should
love
have
to
mentioned
see
that in the opener. And if you're listening later on, I'm sorry you can't use the emojis, or if you're listening on our podcast, but they're there. You should do the thumbs up. You should do hands clapping because the work is pretty powerful as you think about all that has to happen. And what's interesting is I see more hands clapping. Thank you so much. Um, you're doing this work, and I was talking just a minute ago about PLCs, which really are about teachers getting together, and their building leaders. But keeping the caregivers informed is really important. And so, in this conversation, it feels like we're doubling down on transparency about creating opportunities for involvement and then sharing in the decision making. Um, I don't know, Brandy. It feels like you're really good at this whole parent thing, and I'm not sure every school really is. Why is that? Actually, don't answer why is it so important. I get it, but like, fundamentally, how are you making that happen? Is it just energy, enthusiasm, consistency, uh, clarity, all of the above? Talk about that.
Honestly, it goes back to a deep rooted sense of commitment that I have in terms of being a parent. I have recalled over the years supporting family members and their children in their educational journeys. And I want all families to feel supported and welcome in their school communities because we need them. And so, in terms of thinking about how we share that information with parents, we stand behind transparency, the good, the bad, the indifferent, because we have to have those conversations in a very realistic way of what we are seeing and what we believed to be the cause of those outcomes. And so we want to share all of the wins with families, of course, and then also when we encounter situations where our students are not making the progress we were anticipating, we want to share that with families in a way um, that recognizes they still want the best for their students as we do. And how do we plot a path forward that continues to keep the family involved as to what the next steps are, and also giving them some agency in terms of the decisions that are being made about their children's future.
Yeah, that's interesting. The theme around agency in the work often applies towards students, but I think you're inviting parents in to have some and caregivers some agency in how this work rolls out. I think that's pretty important. It leads to really good outcomes that you then get to celebrate. Um, and and how do you do that intentionally? Like, we have emojis here, so I can intentionally clap and give thumbs up, but has to be a little bit more systemic. So, how are you celebrating wins, both big and small, Brandy?
We share news blasts. We have family engagement events on campus. We want parents and caregivers and aunties and uncles and everyone in between who
Yep.
is there to rally around those students into that space so they get to see the joy of the students in that space when they are experiencing success. They get to connect with other families who also have students in that space. And again, it's all about that community partnership and how we truly lock arms with each other and we're in this together. And so we want to celebrate together as well and not in isolation.
And Mindy, do you have like systems in place that help schools do that? I mean, Brandy clearly is a natural born communicator and is comfortable celebrating wins and walking towards issues. But like, does On Your Mark have a mechanism to help facilitate that in schools that may not have applied that same approach?
Yes, yes, indeed. So we obsess over the data, and for us, being able to share wins in that data is one of our favorite parts of collaborating with our schools. And so, making sure that our schools are armed with special certificates for students when they make exceptional growth on a skill, or that when a specific classroom has a certain level of attendance, that we are recognizing that so that that gets passed on, and the teacher is receives that positive feedback for that as well. And that those pieces, the things that we're able to share with students are also things that students can take home and share with their families too, to say like, hey, look, I'm really proud of this work that I've done, and of the work I'm doing with the tutor. I really enjoy getting to spend time with, and where I'm learning a ton when it comes to reading. And I just want to underscore in Brandy's communication, about parents and families and involving them in the student learning process is so important. And the more that we can, as a tutoring provider, arm schools with the data and the information that they need to help parents really understand more what's going on in the tutoring sessions and about that child's reading development, the better off that learning experience is going to be for students. And so we need to recognize and celebrate all of the success, because success breeds success.
Hmm.
And that's what we want to continue to see for our students.
Well, let's talk about the iterative success that you're having, because Brandy, you cited that hey, uh, closing a gap in 1 year is not enough. We have to think about acceleration, but even before that, you have to get the kids in the seats for them to learn. And it looks like that's starting to happen. Mindy, I think maybe you did some analysis with, the schools you work with across the country, and it's a lot of them. have an average attendance threshold, and it seems like Brandy's team is kind of outperforming.
Yeah, they definitely are. I know I gave a teaser to that a little bit earlier in the session. We know that students grow more when they're in more tutoring sessions. And tracking attendance is a way that we are able to help also incentivize attendance, because we pay attention to the data that matters to us. And when we're having conversations about it, that's where we see that growth happen. So you can see that, Yes Prep has had some exceptional attendance, over 90%. We've seen over the past 3 years that when students attend at least 3 out of 4 tutoring sessions, so that's 75% or higher attendance, that is when their growth really takes off. And so Brandy and team have really taken that to heart, and are making sure that students are in seats for sessions.
So the data is clear that if they get 75% attendance or above, they're going to see meaningful growth, which is what
That's
Brandy's really after. And so you've accomplished the task together of getting kids connected to tutors. Then the hard work really begins in some ways. Like, how do you keep them focused? And as a parent of 3 kids with varying degrees of focus, that ain't easy. Looks like it's happening though. Mindy, can you talk about Yes Prep in the
right.
context of a national kind of data set?
Yes. So, what another thing that we pay attention to, especially in between our academic benchmarks, which happen both at the beginning of the year and the middle of the year, that's right around the corner. We can't wait to see the academic data come back on the students' reading levels. But another thing we pay attention to is student on-task rates, and those are reported by our tutors as a part of this biweekly progress monitoring work that we do. And what we've seen here, again, is not just being in session, but it's attending to the session. And it is the work of our tutors to ensure that they are providing a really engaging session for students. And then it is the work of the school to make sure they've created a space and an environment where students are really able to tune into what's happening in their tutoring session. And so we've seen, again, Yes Prep really leading the way across the country on making sure that students are on task during their tutoring sessions as well, so that they are there on time and ready to go for that full 20 minutes. And that when they are there, they are as focused as possible. And I can't help, because I'm like a school data geek. Like, I see the third graders struggling a little bit more than the first and second graders. And those are intentional conversations that Brandy and her team and me and the folks at OnYourMark are going to have around how do we increase engagement levels for third graders so that we can bring that number in line with what we're seeing from our first and second graders as well.
And Brandy, shout out to you, because you've already narrated all the things that have to happen to make this successful. So your communication style, your transparency, your never-ending checklist of making sure that the things that need to happen are in place for this kind of success, even iterative, even early on. This success has to happen to see the benchmarks that we're looking for. So I'm going to leave this open for just a second. If folks have questions, I see some fabulous comments from all over the place, really, both public in the chat and private. Folks who are talking about, yes, it's really about the data that helps drive connections. Yes, about celebrating the connection between the school and the home. Brandy, we're a little tight, but I'd love to hear what's your most successful family engagement strategy. Do you have an event or a strategy or a thing that has worked for you that others can take away?
We do a ton of work with social media because, of course, if you're not on social media, you're not doing anything. So we want to ensure that we're blasting out information around events that are happening on campus. We're also hyper aware, depending on where the school is, if we have more families who need events that happen during the school day or events that need to happen after school. So I don't want to say it's one particular strategy. It's really and truly being very in touch with your community needs in terms of the best time of day to hold events. And that's where we have the greatest turnouts, is where we are most consistent with having the time of day for those events.
Again, it's not only meeting them where they're at. Now you're meeting them when they're at. I'll do some liberties with the English language there, but it's both the where and the when that makes you so successful in this work. It's really powerful. I see folks preparing to wind down, and a request for the second to the last slide. Let's see. Showing some of the success here around time on task, but then getting folks in there. So yeah, this data is really encouraging for an early implementation to see folks getting, into the room, into their sessions, and then being on task is really powerful. It's the kind of thing that we're all looking for. So you saw a thank you slide up there. I want to thank Brandy and Mindy for joining us. And again, I want to thank the folks at OnYourMark for the work you do as a mission-led organization to deliver high-impact literacy tutoring at Yes Prep and at public schools around the country. It's important that you're grounded in the science of reading, because that kind of delivery of focused instruction during the school day is what's going to move the needle for kids. It matters that you're using highly trained tutors, not just anyone who walks in off the street, and that, as we've heard, you're connecting it back to data, whether it's the Dibbles assessment or some other data set that's really important. And the alignment piece. I mean, we talk about the need to communicate, to engage, but really making sure it's validated, such as you've done with UFly and the M-Class interventions from Amplify. I mean, that's really powerful. So the data's there. The studies have been done. OnYourMark is having an impact, and it's thanks in no small part to folks like Brandy who are making it happen on the ground. Any closing comments, Mindy? Any final thoughts before we start to sign off?
Just grateful to everybody for their attendance and participation today. Thanks so much. And thank you to Brandy for all of your work supporting students on the ground at Yes.
Brandy, the floor is
Thank
yours
you.
for closing comments.
Absolutely. Thank you all for having me. Please feel free to connect with me via LinkedIn. And I just want to say all of this work, shout out to the campuses who do this work, it all goes back to mindsets. Mindsets are your pillars and foundations for really great work.
And with that, thank you, Mindy, Brandy. Thanks to the hundreds of folks who joined us today and the thousands who will listen via on-demand views at EdWeb. We had participants from across the United States. I lost count after dozens of states represented. We saw Canada, we saw Paraguay, Saudi Arabia. It's such a delight to have you all here and to be in the room with folks like Mindy and Brandy. Keep it going at EdWeb. Find out more information at onyourmarkeducation.org and go forth and prosper. Thanks, everybody.